Hey everyone, welcome back to my main channel. So I was having this drunken conversation with a girlfriend of mine who's trans, and the drunken conclusion of this amazing 2 hour long conversation I had with her was that I should probably bring that conversation to you guys and see what you guys have to say. And now that I'm actually sitting here or standing here about to do it, it's either a good idea or a bad idea. We'll find out. But we were talking about our frustrations with the trans community and how the trans community as it stands right now in 2021 will never achieve acceptance or integration into society in the way that the community by and large claims that it wants, right? Acceptance, normalization, all those things that I personally want, because, it'd be very counterproductive for me to want anything other than that as a trans person myself who just wants to live life and be successful and buy a home and have kids, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, and by the way, super quick, I just want to thank everyone who has joined my podcast. We have 2 episodes up right now on my Patreon for the Blaire White Project. It is so exciting to get this off the ground already. It has been so much fun. The feedback and the amount of people that have joined and supported it has blown my mind. A lot of people are saying that the podcast makes them fall in love with me all over again, and that it's very reminiscent of very old school Blaire, where I'm just very loose-lipped and talking about whatever the fuck I want. So that's been really good. So link in the description to join my podcast. I'll love you forever. So this conversation with my friend was sparked after I watched this old school episode of Dr. Phil. It was from 2007, 2008. And it was basically an audience debate on the Dr. Phil show about gay marriage, where half of the audience was vehemently against it, whether it be for religious or social reasons, and half of it was pro, whether they were gay or just supported gay people getting married, right? And it was amazing because it felt so dated. It felt so ancient, even though it wasn't that long ago. I vividly remember the days where gay marriage was a very contentious issue, where it was a hot topic, and where no presidential candidates of that era, Obama, Romney, McCain, any of them, Hillary, none of them supported gay marriage, right? They were all against it. And now I feel like it's very difficult to find even 2 people to sit in a room and really debate that issue with passion. Most people now at this point are either supportive of gay marriage or just don't care. There's just no passion in the issue. And I was talking with my girlfriend about this, and I was saying, I don't feel like trans issues, at least in the foreseeable future, are going to ever reach that level of nonchalant discussion. And that nonchalant attitude is so far from what is present within trans discourse. There are few things in public square conversations that invoke more passion, hatred, anger than talking about trans issues. Take it from me as someone who's talked about it for the past 4 or 5 years. People get doxxed over these issues. People get so mad, so passionate about these issues. People themselves over these issues, literally, whether it's bathrooms, sports, dating, just every area of life that makes life, there is a discussion about trans people included or excluded from it, and what is the right way to navigate, right? And my friend and I both agree that the trans community as it stands now will never achieve full acceptance, and how we've almost noticed an uptick in anti-trans people, and almost a resurgence of people who straight up don't like trans people, don't get it, are very turned off by the community and by trans ideology, and that actually lash out at us in an anti-trans way, which there was this weird golden period where I never got any anti-trans hate. And now I'm seeing it happen, and we have a theory about why that is. The messaging of the trans community is so off. The fundamental difference between the gay rights movement and now, trans issues and the trans rights movement, I don't know if that's really the correct phrase, but you know what I'm talking about. The gay rights movement had very great messaging, and it was branded very well, and it changed minds because everything the gay rights movement sort of argued was both true and was easy to get behind. The argument from the gay rights movement was very much, we are normal people just like you, we are just maybe born a little different, and we want to be included in society. We don't want to take anything away from you. We just want to be able to be included in society in the following ways, whether it's adoption, gay marriage, etc. It was a message of a desire for assimilation rather than deconstructing society to fit around the gay community, which is very important because I feel as though in many ways it's the opposite for the trans community. And when I speak of trans ideology and trans activists, I'm not speaking of the individual transgender person, okay? That's not what I'm talking about. There is a difference. But trans ideology and trans activists who use that ideology to gain acceptance, and that's, their alleged goal, They seek to deconstruct society, and they do not want trans people to assimilate into society. There was a viral tweet, I'm going to try to find it and put it on the screen, a while back, which was some trans activists saying, stop having cis heroes, basically. Like, stop looking up to people who aren't trans. And they were speaking to trans people, basically saying, like, don't aspire to be like anyone who is not trans. Like, do not assimilate into, like, real life and the general population. And the topic of biological sex is a very good example of this refusal to assimilate and desire for deconstruction. So a lot of trans activists, especially the most notable ones, would rather completely deconstruct the concept of biological sex, which is a long-held, scientifically agreed upon reality, right? Would rather say things like this, that trans women and trans girls are biological women and biological girls, which is a lie. It's literally just a lie. And it completely goes against the actual concept of being transgender, which is being born a biological sex and transitioning and living your life as another. It's a very simple concept that most people can understand, right? Some people can't. And, you know, we're working on them. But most people get that, like, oh, that person was, like, born a boy, but, like, looks like a girl now and, you know, goes by she. Like, that's a simple enough concept. And it's also a narrative that transgender people spent decades trying to build, because it differentiated them from other things like cross-dressers and drag queens, is that, like, no, like, we're born this, but we live this way. We're not performers. We are not actors. We're not doing this for a kink. It's very different. And now a lot of trans activists are coming along and completely ripping that down and saying, no, actually, if you don't believe that transgender women are biological women, and that there's no meaningful or notable differences between the two, then you're a bigot. And that's where people get very turned off. It would be the same, the equivalent would be the gay community saying, no, two men can have a child together without a woman, therefore we should be able to adopt. Like, stop. The correct argument, and it's one that the gay rights movement actually used, was we know two men and two women cannot make a baby, but we promise that we can provide safe, stable, and loving homes for a child. Please let us and allow us the legal opportunity to adopt like everyone else. Do you see the difference? That is a rational, not too much to ask for argument. But if the gay community said, no, you have to believe that two men can actually give birth to a child, and if you don't agree, you're a bigot, people were going to get turned off. That's what happens when everyday, normal, regular people hear things like transgender women are no different than biological women ever, and if you disagree, you're a bigot. Here's another one. The notion of biological sex was developed for the exclusive purpose of being weaponized against people. How trans activists' insistence on retelling these obnoxious, science-denying, blatant lies and then being shocked when people react as if they are obnoxious, science-denying, blatant lies is such a self-defeating, perpetual cycle. And we keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. I say we, not as in me, and not any trans people I know in my real life, but the online discourse, trans activists, fight for your rights type of crowd. And it really puts people off. I mean, it makes us look like the flat earthers of gender. It's not enough just to ask for acceptance. These people want you to deconstruct, deprogram, and unlearn long-held standard truths about life. Like when you're sitting there insisting, no, there's no difference between a trans woman and a biological woman when they're competing in sports. When the realities of sexual dimorphism have been, it's in what? It's supposed to be in every species but humans now? Is that what you want people to believe? I'm sure now y'all are going to find like one species of animal where there's no sexually dimorphic differences. Okay, whatever. In 99.9% of the animal kingdom, males and females are different, but not in humans. Really? And if we even question that, you're not even allowed to question that, really? Okay. You know, when the trans community repeatedly insists that there are absolutely never any issues with any child deciding to undergo a medical transition as soon as the law allows them to, and that they're omniscient about their gender, these children, not about any other area of life, you know, but just their gender. Like everyone always knows that as a child. And that medical transition won't be a bad thing. And that you have to completely ignore any and all teenage detransition stories because those are just, you know, too problematic to hear. That turns people off. It would be a lot easier and better for everyone if the trans community just allowed for the very simple, yet I guess way too nuanced reality and just talked about how, yes, like some children absolutely know when they're that age and they're not going to regret transition, but some children absolutely, you know, fall into an online community that might convince them they are trans, that some do regret it. Like, you can't just ignore that there are teenagers making videos online who have removed their breasts or permanently altered, you know, their voices or their bodies. And you're just supposed to ignore that. That's literally the only argument from the trans community is like, no, that's a problem. We can't listen to those stories. I'm sorry, you should be able to listen to both. So the rational, easily digestible solution is just to say, let's work together to really raise the bar for criteria of how people, both underage and of age, are diagnosed with gender dysphoria so that we can definitely minimize the chances of people having this regret, because that is something so traumatic and so terrible, especially when you're a teenager. Again, I'm trying to communicate that this is just so self-defeating over and over and over again. And I think that sometimes the trans community has no idea how what they say actually translates to the general public, because a lot of trans people online very much confine themselves into an echo chamber of just trans ideology, just their trans community on Twitter or TikTok or Instagram or whatever it is, right? And so their arguments make sense to everyone, you know, in their circle. But then they act so shocked when people push against it so hard from the outside. It's because when you start to get a little older and you start to actually like integrate into society, assimilate into society, you realize a lot of these arguments just don't hold up. And then if you have to actively ignore certain realities to make your argument work, if you have to ignore those teenage detransition stories, if you have to ignore the fact that like, oh, those trans women really are demolishing those female athletes in every single competition with almost no exceptions, but just ignore it. Like, what? And I bring it back to the gay rights movement, because the fundamental difference between them and the trans rights movement is that the gay rights movement didn't have to tell any lies to gain acceptance. They simply had to tell the truth, because the truth always wins. They simply had to say, hey, we know we're different, but we can be productive members of society. We can be included in the conversation. A lot of trans people don't want to be included in the conversation. They want to start an entirely new conversation, force you to join, but also tell you you're not allowed to join because that's their conversation. And that doesn't work. That creates a very adversarial relationship with society, and that will never actually bring trans people to acceptance, which should be the goal, right? If that's the goal, then why is this not working? Why are there, you know, in my experience, in most trans people's experience I know, more anti-trans people now than ever? Why? Ask yourself why. If all this activism is working, then why? It's not about blaming the victim here. It's not about how there's no onus on like general society on how they treat trans people, because I think there are issues like employment discrimination, housing discrimination that are really big issues. And I think that's so sad. I've never personally experienced that, but I know trans women and trans men that have. I actually know trans people that have been denied housing over and over again because of it. So that's an issue. But I'm speaking purely on where the trans community holds responsibility for how society reacts to us. Real people in the real world who are not part of your transgender group chat on TikTok don't like seeing trans people demolish women in women's sports. It provokes a visceral reaction to protect those women. And if trans people want to go against that reaction, you're never going to win. That's so instinctual, that's so animalistic, and it's also healthy for a society. When people see very young people transitioning and then trans people refusing to acknowledge any circumstances in which that might not be the right thing for that child, and then suddenly, no, your child's going to kill themselves under every circumstance if you don't let them medically transition very, very young, people don't like that. They feel like you're attacking children. They feel like you're abusing children. They're always going to react that way. So if the trans community doesn't come to a point where they have some level of compromise on these issues, it's always going to be like this. And you can get mad at me for being the messenger and telling you, as someone who is a part of society, I have assimilated to society. I talk about trans issues all the time on here, but in my real life, it is so far from a conversation in my real life. It is so far from relevant in my real life. So like, I know what it's like outside of the trans walls. I used to be in them. You know, there was a time where I definitely was one of those people who would react emotionally to, you know, people disagreeing with trans athletes, or people disagreeing with children transitioning, or people disagreeing with dating preferences in trans people. And I know what it's like. But when you leave those walls of the trans community and you take a peek over, you start understanding why we've garnered some of the reputation that we have. There simply has to be some level of assimilation, and not complete, because clearly the gay community still has their culture. Like the gay community still, there are so many aspects of gay culture that are specific to gay culture that have nothing to do with, like, you know, straight people have no idea about it, right? And aren't included in it. And that's fine. We can have that. But come on now. We can't just go against every single thing that society believes and try to rip it all down rather than be included in it. At some point, you have to have the real conversations. And the real conversations always lead to a healthy compromise. They never lead to, oh, just this one side's completely right, this one side's completely wrong. That's so rare in life, and that's not the case with trans issues at all. But what's frustrating, and my friend and I were talking about this, is how so few people are willing to have those real conversations that actually lead to full equality, access to resources, like equal treatment under the law. Those are the things we're supposed to be fighting for. And instead we're caught up on like pronoun madness and dysphoria. You don't need dysphoria, you do need dysphoria. And I fall into that too. I fall into those debates myself. And it's toxic. And it's so far from what people who are not in the community are actually talking about. You know what I mean? Like when I have a real friend in my real life, and this is a true story, who came to me and said, open up about how their child is involved in a sports team in school, and they just put these 3 trans athletes on the team, and how those 3 trans athletes are just destroying the competition each and every time, and there's not even a chance of anyone beating them, right? Am I just supposed to be like, I can't hear you because that's inconvenient, and I don't want to talk about that? When I get emails from teen detransitioners, like we've interviewed on this channel before and we've spoken to, and I've tried to highlight their stories before, am I supposed to just be like, no, that's harmful and we can't have that conversation? That's not real life. And I think the trans community really needs to look at themselves in the mirror and ask if they want to be a part of real life or if they just want to be a part of ideologically driven trans discourse on the internet. Which is it? Because I choose real life. Because I see what is happening now. I have been in rooms in recent times, maybe like in the past year or so, where I feel the tension when people know that I'm trans, where I can feel the walking on eggshells. I can feel the internal rolling of the eyes where like, oh God, this is one of those people who's going to get upset over anything I say or do. And it's going to be some huge thing if I make any missteps, so let me not even talk to them. And that's a horrible feeling for me as someone who actually enjoys the company of people and wants to be included in conversations in life. Like, that's awful. For the first time, I'm starting to feel this negative image people have in their mind painted of me as a trans person that just wasn't present before the sort of rise of trans ideology online. And I know a ton of trans people who feel the exact same way. This is all the opposite of what we should be doing. Ask yourself, if all this activism is so effective, why is it not making any changes? Why, if anything, is there regression? Why? That is the question I pose to you. Leave it in the comment box below. Let me know what you think about this whole conversation. I believe everything I said here. And that's all I can do. Make sure you guys subscribe to this YouTube channel. If you're not, make sure you subscribe to my second channel, Blaire Black. I'll put an annotation somewhere on the screen so you can do that. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok because I post on there way more than I do on here. So you gotta follow those to keep up with me. And make sure you join my Patreon to be a part and watch my podcast, The Blaire White Project. Link is down below. Love you guys. See you in the next video. Bye.